Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Chalia with PHCA. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. A few quick updates to share before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website. The webinar has been approved for one continuing education credit for all attendees. For those who provided a NAB number, credits will be uploaded within the next 2 weeks. We'll also share certificates with those in attendance. As we begin today, all attendees will be in listen-only mode. Please feel free to submit your questions as we go through the presentation today, utilizing the chat icon on your screen, and we'll be sure to answer those questions, like I said, as we go through today's presentation. So I will now turn the webinar over to Kevin and Wes. Go ahead, guys.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure meeting you all virtually here today. As you signed up for this webinar, you saw that we are focusing today on audiences, particularly in the digital world and how that's changed and how it looks different. And the highlight or the title here is Future Residents and Employees, but the reality is you probably have lots of different stakeholders. In that original description, you may have considered things like perhaps it's policymakers, maybe it's family caregivers. There's just a whole variety of audiences, and you need to use different messaging to reach each of them. So that's what we're going to dive into today. The learning objectives that you also had on there are to understand emerging platforms and how they can be used to engage audiences, how to apply basic audience targeting on the respective digital channels, and then how to decipher differences in your audience and how to cater that messaging to each of those groups that we just touched upon. So here's a quick agenda for what we're thinking of today. As a little bit of background, you might see things like the report card on there. We're going to dive into that here very shortly and move rather quickly through some of these setup items. But some of this might feel like it is a little bit perhaps advanced, depending on where you are as we dive into the uses for this audience. We felt like that was a great way to start this off, was to look at, okay, we're identifying these audiences and how to reach them. How do you actually put that into practice? This isn't going to be a deep dive into advertising and those tools, but we want you to have a general understanding of where folks like us go to apply these targeting levers when we're actually putting them into practice on ad campaigns or social channels or what have you. So again, this is the guide for today, and we're gonna get ready to dive right in.
Well, we can't cover everything in an hour. Is that what you're saying?
Probably not.
So we wanted to show you just the what we call the digital media universe, and probably a more appropriate title would be something like a hemisphere, because the full universe keeps expanding, right? If you are tapped into any trades, or if you follow marketing news, you see things coming out every day. Not to mention, probably your inboxes are inundated with everyone, emailing you about the next best thing. So we wanted to just give you this graphic to show all the things that are revolving around digital advertising, but where we're going to focus is definitely on the audience targeting side, which is the right side of your screen, and you'll see programmatic targeting. I think that the biggest challenge that we face, regardless of if you're a community nursing home or assisted living, any industry really is challenged with, there is a lot of information, there are a lot of options, and we only have so much time and money to really effectively utilize a lot of these channels. So we're going to focus on audience targeting, but we wanted to give you the context that we understand that you're probably doing either many of these or maybe a few. And what we're trying to give you or provide is provoke ideas on where maybe this could fit into your current plan or your plan moving into the new year. So we had this really as the first time we had it labeled as like an assessment, or what did we call it? We didn't call it homework. We were actually going to give you a few minutes to do this, and then we thought report card. That's right. But we switched it to homework because we're not going to spend a lot of time. But we wanted to put this up there, and we're going to send this deck after after our time together. And we really encourage you to do an assessment, about your website, all of the things that you're doing. And if some of what we present today gives you some options to maybe integrate audience targeting, specifically in programmatic, which we'll get into on the next slide, that would be our hope for you. So when we talk about intentional marketing communications, we understand that all of these things work together for the greater good, right? So if you're doing something that's effective, our hope is that by pairing that with something that's new, maybe new for you, or how do I work that within our budget or the other tools that we have in our toolbox, how can I make that work? So this will be something that we encourage you to look at and hopefully use it as a way to move forward.
One thing I might add there, Kev, too, is that don't be, these assessments are great. This is how we usually start many of our client engagements, because we believe in everyone is unique. Like today, we're talking about a very specific industry. You have many similarities with all the other attendees on this call, but the reality is you probably also have some stark differences too. So what is it that makes your community unique, your situation unique? And then this hopefully helps identify where you fall within that kind of digital landscape and how you can use that uniqueness to get messages out that show those differences to people. So these are questions we ask. We take a very customized approach when we do one-on-one client engagements. And we often ask questions like this just to get an understanding of, okay, where do they land currently before we try to launch? It doesn't feel genuine to just start. Like, you can't treat everyone the same. People are coming at it from different levels, and people have already taken certain steps or may not have taken certain steps in that process. So that's why we look at it this way. That leads us into the platform side of it. So what is programmatic advertising? I'm not sure if many of you have heard that term before. Essentially, when we talk about programmatic advertising, it is reaching users or audiences anywhere within their online journey, right? Brand safe sites, but you can do a variety of targeting, which is about what we're going to dive into, and reach them, whether they're in apps, whether they're in desktop, whether they're on mobile. There's different ways to apply it, like on that first screen, and we'll show you here again shortly, things like streaming video, streaming audio. We can apply those targeting levers to a lot of different applications across that digital universe. One thing that we usually try to point out is think of them as individual users, not so much trying to buy this in what was formerly a way of like going to direct to a site, right? Like you might, certain clients or certain advertisers might try to go and say, I want to run ads on ESPN. We generally, when we're talking programmatic advertising, are not thinking of singular sites. We're thinking of how do we get to those end users through a variety of different ways. And that's usually through video, display banners, native. We'll touch upon how we get to them, but those are the different, this is the platform of which a lot of these messages are served up and how we can get into the targeting itself.
Yeah, one thing I would add, Wes, is the very root of programmatic. I mean, programmatic is really the term of computer learning, right? So with the emergence more of AI, artificial intelligence, and the way that computers are learning behaviors or learning in order to deliver messaging, it's not just in digital. I mean, we talk about it a lot in digital because that's the most common use. However, it's sort of starting to span other traditional media types, including out of home or billboard. So all of the billboard companies, I'm sure that you have many in your own communities, your neighborhoods where they're digital. A lot of these companies are now having the ability to serve your message based on a specific profile. So it's not necessarily about a location or, as what Wes said, a site, but really where is the intended audience at? Where are they going to be? And how do we allow the program, the computer platform, to maximize those opportunities that you're extending the frequency in which you're delivering the message? So if you're not doing If you're not doing programmatic, or if you have never heard of it, you will probably in the very near future.
Yeah, the one comment there is we talk about users. It's kind of fun as we get ready to dive into the audiences specifically and the ways we target. Think of them not only for the benefits of your community, but also personally what you might discover as you go through your own online journeys. Once you're aware of some of the targeting here, you're probably going to see ads then as you leave and use your phone or your desktop, and then how those devices sync up. And you might do a search on your desktop on a work computer and then be served ads for something that's relevant to that at home on your mobile phone. That is different ways of audience targeting probably in play. And now hopefully you'll be armed with understanding a little bit more about how that happens in the background. One thing I will lastly add on this point is that this users' identities are protected. So we don't know that it is Wes Snyder or Kevin Wirt who are out there receiving these ads. It's usually random strings of characters, or they might be tied to an IP address, which again is a random string of characters based upon location and device. But it is not specific. While it's specific to a user, it's not specific by name, and there is data that is protected behind those walls. So.
And we're not talking about Alexa picking up what you're saying and then serving you an ad on your device, which is a little bit creepy.
All right, so now we're going to look into the very specific part of digital audience targeting here. So we showed you that matrix, as we sometimes call it earlier, and that can be a bit intimidating. It's showing you the entire ecosystem of advertising options that are out there. And now as we look at the different audiences within digital targeting, this would be a cool snapshot. So we're going to dive into each of these individually and talk a little bit about them. So we're not spending much time here, but we find this graphic to be helpful. So if you were sharing this information with someone, or if you wanted to kind of have it to remember or think about later, this is the place we would probably tell you to start. Print this out, leave it on your desk, hang it on your wall, whatever that might look like for you. It's just kind of that 30,000 foot view of the different audience targeting methods in one glance or in one snapshot. So then we just wanted to take a second here. But again, this is maybe more for help after the fact, as we're going to get ready to dive right in.
Yeah. So one thing as we get into the first layer of targeting, which is probably what we consider to be the most basic. When you look at that last slide that Wes had up, I think in our experience, a lot of clients, they look at this and they realize that they don't have a budget, right, in order to do all of these effectively. But we do encourage, when we get to the end, we're going to talk about, best practices and things to look forward to or look for when you're doing something like programmatic digital advertising. But we encourage there to be a little bit of a diversity with what you're doing in terms of the mix. So just because you're doing contextual or demographic doesn't mean that you can't do something like a geofence. But be very mindful of diluting your budget, because at the end of the day, we want whatever strategy or tactic or targeting that we're deploying to be effective. And so part of that is measuring the effectiveness and understanding where those impressions are being delivered. So the first layer of targeting is demographic. And many of you probably are doing some kind of demographic targeting beyond the basic, gender, age. Many platforms that are utilized to serve these types of ads, no matter if it's on a content site or in a gaming app, wherever there's digital wherever the footprint is, you can utilize multiple layers within demographic. So for example, you could even drill down to how much someone might owe on their mortgage or how much equity they have in their home, which could be an indicator. So when we talk about demographics, we're talking about not only job titles, occupations, household income, the basic layers, but also to go down and try to layer on something specific that about your community, and those that potentially either could be a future employee. So where is their online behavior? What does their household look like? What do they find important? The two things that we do want to point out, because demographic is vanilla, is a lot of platforms have the ability to addressably target. So when we talk about addressable targeting, the root word being address is down to the physical household level. So many platforms, if you layer on specific demographic criteria, you can then isolate the households within a specific geographic area that fit those criteria. The great part about that is you're eliminating a lot of waste, and being down to the physical household level is just a very efficient way to do things. The other valuable piece, like why is it valuable, is it is a volume play, but it's also an efficiency play. So when we look at this, because we can target by physical household level at the physical household address level, you can actually take lists that you currently have in a database. Maybe you have a CRM, maybe there's a nursing information database that you have access to with physical addresses. Again, as Wes said, we're not targeting a specific person's name. We're targeting an IP address that's associated with that address. So we can actually match, and it's a very effective way. We do a lot in the financial world, even with credit unions. So there's membership, and they want to serve ads of a product that they think would be of relevance to that particular member. So we do what's called a CRM match. So when you're talking about demographic targeting, there's a lot of ways that you can combine that specific targeting with an efficiency of making sure that you're only serving ads to a very specific audience set.
Yeah, one thing I would add here is first and third party data. As we get into that, so we put that in here and some differentiators there. So third-party data is being collected all the time through credit card transactions, purchase behavior, email lists that are signed up. Those can be synced to devices. If you're saving your credit card to your device, that's syncing up info. The reality is this data is out there, and it is constantly getting improved and more robust as we go. First-party data is when an individual provider has access to your personal information. You're actually giving them that information. So it might be if you sign up for a social channel, you're telling Facebook that you're married and where you live and what your birthday is and maybe some of your interests or hobbies and things like that. Like same goes with, say you sign up for you like getting news about a certain industry. You might give them your job at where you work. You might give them how long you've worked there, things like that if it's related to business. So those are examples. The former there, or the latter, is first-party data. So demographic targeting is applying both of those through a variety of data partners that inform how and where these ads are served. So I just wanted to make that call out. Along those lines, this specific type of targeting is one that is slowly being decreased and phased out, quite frankly, and that's because of privacy laws that are happening. And it's something that's just continually changing. It has not completely gone away, but as some of these platforms and large providers like Chrome or Apple or Facebook or Google are making their own privacy laws and restrictions, it's limiting the ways that we can apply demo targeting. So just something to keep in mind on that front. The next one we're diving into is contextual targeting. It's exactly what it sounds, right? It's the context of which certain ads are served to users. So if someone is reading, we have an example on here about Air Jordan, right? And how does it work? Well, Air Jordan might choose to run on sites that would be putting out news around like the NBA or basketball or workout routines, things of that nature, so that when a user is engaging in content that's around that specific sport, or the sneakers that support playing that sport, then are in alignment with the content that they're reading. This can be determined by a category. It can be determined by the sites themselves and which categories they fall into. It can be real time, or it can be served thereafter once we know users are consuming that content. we've identified this is the type of user we want, and those ads can follow them in their internet journey. So if they're reading about basketball, they might get an Air Jordan ad in that moment while they're reading it, or they might get a sponsored content about like best sneakers for playing outdoor hoops or something like that after the fact when they're consuming some other type of content in their internet journey. So that's contextual targeting. We're trying to find users that are consuming this specific type of news or information online, and then they get into our audience bucket. Sometimes we refer to these as buckets of audiences. Anything on contextual you want to add, Kevin?
No, I would just say that contextual is a great way to align with thought leadership. So because it's really the definition of interest and intent. So if I'm identified in my online behavior as being interested in Air Jordans, or in the case of PHCA members, trying to identify or tips for selecting a skilled nursing community, or tips for understanding Alzheimer's, things like that are relevant to what that particular family or even an employee, like, what are some of the interested content that someone that is in the industry that is looking for a job change, or, really wants to understand what a specific community, what their heart is, or how they go about being different from someone else that they might be working for. So it is a great way to align yourself with thought leadership and be very relevant to that particular user's journey.
That's a great point, Kevin. That actually makes me think of the types of units that get out into the world, right? So like the example of Air Jordans is very much retail based. Well, the reality is for many of the PHCA members that it's not a retail transaction, right? Like this is service based. This is an emotional decision. And that's where messaging comes in. So not only identifying the right audience and how to target them, but then finding a message that supports how you're targeting.
Absolutely.
So it might be that thought leadership you just touched on. That might be, rather than like a display ad, that might be, let's get a video out about how we care for our residents, right? Or maybe it's a video about how we care for our employees, like if it's more like human resources, or it's that sponsored content where you're providing value and thought leadership around this is useful information for people that are in this stage and having to consider these decisions. So that's a great point. Moving along, keyword search.
So keyword search, I mean, I'm sure every attendee on this webinar is probably doing some kind of pay-per-click Google AdWords, although I did see a Bing commercial yesterday. Bing is starting to take more of the market share, which is super intriguing to us that are digital geeks or marketing advertising geeks. But so keyword search is not what we're not talking about appearing in search results in Google or Bing. What we're talking about is understanding that if someone did search for a term or we can do the same kind of list of terms, that we would then be able to serve them a display banner in various sizes wherever they go in their online behavior. So if they're on a news site consuming content, or again, gaming app, or weather, the Weather Channel or something like that, that we would be able to reinforce that information with a specific tailored message that you created. So the platform's just matching up the search results with display banner advertising. And while we think this is valuable, it's shown incredible conversion rates because you're marrying the idea of search. Like, so when we talk about, there's sort of two worlds. There's those that are searching for you and those that we want to reach that fit within a specific criteria, but maybe they're not searching. This actually marries both sides, where we know that they're interested because they're appearing in search results. We're just going to follow them and reinforce our messaging with a complementary type of approach. It's a great way to reinforce brand and to follow up with those particular families.
One thing with keyword search for this particular industry that we always call out is this one gets a little bit tricky, and you probably experienced it if you run PPC campaigns, which is pay-per-click campaign for those not, lots of terminology that gets tossed around in advertising. If someone's running PPC, you may have run into this, that HIPAA regulations do sometimes impact a keyword search campaign in your industry. So there's ways to creatively get around that. We're running a campaign for another partner right now that's in this space, and they're looking at like memory care. They have a special memory care program, and we were able to kind of fine tune that list to like work around terms that they were allowed to use, and then some that they were not. And then it's from there, how do you optimize that to capitalize on those that are showing the most engagement? We look at reports afterwards to see, okay, this one term is really generating a lot of impressions, it seems like, but it's not leading to much follow through, engagement, click activity. Maybe that's not the best fit. And then here's another one that's just a step or two down as far as impressions, but is really generating, like the ads or the messaging is really syncing up. And that's just an ever ongoing cycle of having to put stuff out there and then review it, see what's working and what's not, to create the most effective kind of campaigns or messaging. This leads us into domain targeting. So at the beginning, we talked about how this is all about the user and the audience and less about the sites themselves that you're hitting. Domain targeting provides some of that in terms of getting to specific content sites, right? So generally, this is across a category. This is not saying that you're going to one singular site. Some examples here might be looking at by names. You might have a list of them that's like Health Digest, or by category, health and beauty. The reality is there are so many different large sites, small sites, blogs, apps relating to a category like health, right? So trying to pick just one or two is not usually very efficient. What we try to do is look at that and create basically a list of sites that are most relevant to a specific category. It's a way to just fine tune that digital ecosystem. Sometimes if you know that you need to hit people with a lot of frequency, this is helpful because, again, when we're audience targeting, depending upon how broad your audience is, sometimes the frequency gets a little spread out depending on your budget. So if we have clients that are working with more specific budgets and they have a very precise category of content, we might say, let's come up with some domains and apply that, because we know users searching for this type of info, it's really helpful for a given period of time. This comes up, say, with like a shorter sales cycle where a decision might need to be made. Say it's for like auto shopping, right? Like you might have people that are super into like that type of content and lists of domains around those online shopping habits for autos for a very short period of time. Let's get a whole category of those sites together and focus on that to kind of limit that digital universe a little bit more.
Yeah, I think there's more control, right? So it's a quality over quantity, and I use those terms lightly because what we're proposing with other targeting buckets is not that it's not quality, but it's just there's a lot more variables that can influence. So where is the ad being seen on a site? Like what content are you being surrounded with? We're very protective of our brands, and we don't want to align with content that could be questionable, right? So we can all think about what that might be. So when you domain target, and if you have direct relationships or able to pare down that list, then you control the environment in which you're functioning, right? And it also frees up the ability to do potentially a little bit more creative or dynamic ad execution. So, with all of this, there's, probably, what would you say, Wes? Like 4 to 6 sizes that you probably want to do as a standard operating procedure, just to make sure that they're getting in different places amongst, across the universe. With this, we know that we've seen large format ad sizes are going to do a little bit better, right? So as long as you're being mindful of the messaging, the call to action, how you're optimizing those things, something like domain targeting is a great way to mix in a smaller pool of people, but much more controllable environment.
Great point. Geofencing and event capture.
Yeah, geofencing and event capture. So geography fencing and event capture is a great way to isolate physical locations, right? So we're identifying, most of this is mobile traffic, right? So if there's a job fair or a specific hospital, even a competitor that you might want to fence, it's a electronic fence that we draw around in order to capture device IDs that are appearing within that physical boundary area. This really came to more popularity, I think, after COVID, where there was less traveling, maybe some events were being canceled, or budgets were really cut down. I know that there were a couple clients that said, we've always enjoyed going to this big conference. We just don't have the ability to exhibit there, but it's our audience. So how do we effectively attend without attending? And so this was a great way for us to speak to attendees at a specific conference. It also allows you to follow up, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, in best practices with, making sure that your sites are coded or whatever you're doing, you're able to do some additional things down the customer or user journey. But we know that location is relevant. And so all of these ways are supplementary, very targeted, specific ways for us to reach an audience that might be interested in what you have to say.
Yeah, a couple points I'd add on this one is that, first of all, when we talk about geofencing, keep in mind that we didn't mention this earlier, but all of the targeting we can do can be geo-targeted. So broadly geo-targeted. You could give, say, a multi-county radius around your facility where it makes the most sense to reach. You might say, oh, we need statewide for this message. When we worked with PHCA on some of their messaging last year in their campaign, that had a need to run statewide. So you can go do it that way. You could look at a city or a DMA or a zip code level. This particular one with geofencing are these really isolated locations. I mean, these are buildings or stadiums or events or whatever that might be. A practical example, we're running a campaign right now for a senior living community, and they are looking at things like physical therapy offices, right? So they have like I think it's a 3-county radius, and they want to look at physical therapy offices, and they actually are day partying too. They know some of these offices probably get traffic in for like kids and sports injuries and stuff that happen in the evenings. Well, they said, well, most of like the senior people that we want to meet are scheduling those appointments from 7 to 3, right? So we're actually able to day part and do a geo fence around that physical therapy office from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. every day for a period of time. And then again, here's the audience bucket thing. Any users we capture there go into that audience bucket, and they can get served ads, again, not just when they're there, but after they leave, and their IP address can ping their other devices. So while the capture of the audience is through mobile devices, we can then serve them ads, or they can be reached on things like tablets or desktop, or if you're doing a video, it could even be on their streaming television later on. So just some clarification around how you can put this into practice and some of the ways geography comes into play.
You got super excited about that one.
Yeah, I like it. We'll get into this in best practices, but not every tactic or audience fit is going to be relevant for each type of business or each type of client. But it's fun when you do find one that really aligns. And in this case, when they said, what about like physical therapy? It's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. So retargeting. I guess this one's me, actually. All right.
Yeah, this is I think this is one of our I would say it's included in 99% of the campaigns that we execute.
Yes.
It's incredibly important. So yeah, this is your slide.
Yeah, retargeting. This is basically we apply a tracking pixel. And we'll mention this later in best practices, but a tracking pixel can go onto your site. This is very, webmaster would know very easily how to do that. And chances are you already have some on there and applied to your site. But what it says is then when ads or messages go out to a potential audience and they engage with them, or they visit your site organically, right? Like you're going to have users that hit just through search or whatever. We know that to get action, to move someone through a funnel, they need to have multiple touch points. They need reminders and they need that frequency. So if they've engaged and reached your site, they're familiar with your brand, with what you represent. And we know that to get them to take that next step, generally speaking, you need to hit them again with another type of message. So this is putting those users who have visited your site or engaged with your content into an audience bucket so that then they can get more messaging thereafter. There's a lot of spin-offs to this that are fun and complex. We sometimes run the video campaigns and they treat it the same way. If someone sees a completed video, we're able to track if they've watched one of your videos the whole way through. We can then use that to apply to a retargeted campaign because we almost equate seeing a full video, 60 seconds or 30-second spot about your brand or your organization is almost the same as visiting the website. You've learned a little bit about them. And then there's higher intent or higher action items that can follow by serving other ads or more messaging thereafter. The retargeting is almost always included in any types of campaign messages that we put out there.
Yeah, I think, this whole webinar, we're focused on audience targeting and we talk a lot about the actual banner advertising. So, whether it be a static or animated physical ad, but something to keep in mind, and we've mentioned it a few times, but we're not diving into it, is the ability to use video in your campaigns. A lot of what we're going over in terms of audience, the ability to target audiences in these ways can easily be translated over into streaming video. So sites that have pre-roll, so if you're going to watch content and there's an ad that is before that content or in the middle of that content, but also things like Hulu and Tubi and all of those streaming video platforms that we can't get enough of. That particular sphere of the media universe continues to rotate. I'll say rotate because the video the consumption continues to just keep going. Understanding where that content is being consumed in video is important. Fortunately for us as marketers, we have the ability to tap into targeting buckets like this, not only for display banners, but utilizing platforms that are keyed in on video. So if you have video assets, we would definitely recommend and encourage you to look at those ideas too. Sponsored content. This is like, I think Wes got excited about event capture and geofencing. Sponsored content is something that we've been advocating for years. We've done a number of great projects with publishing partners. And so the easiest way to describe this is like an advertorial. So if you're, I'm not sure of all of your titles on the webinar today, but if you're in marketing, so the idea of like running a paid advertorial, so it's content that you're paying to have published. The difference with this is you're actually working in collaboration with a publisher partner to not only use their expertise in the way that they create content, but they also know how their readers consume. So when you can partner with a publisher to do that, you have a much better chance of being engaging. The other thing about this is that you're trying to build interactive content. So it's not just copy. You can embed video, you can embed polls and surveys and things like that that are going to give a point of contact and action for that particular audience. So the value of this is you have half the lift of what you would typically do if you're creating the content yourself. So you're working with a partner, they're going to then house that content on their site. So it could be a newspaper site in your market. It could be a TV station in your market. Anywhere that has content has the potential to partner with you in this way. So creation of the content, housing the content, which will elevate the credibility. So it comes across as, oh, this is editorial or a piece of content that this particular publisher wrote. The last part of it is they have the ability to serve this programmatically to get people to that content. So it's not just serving ads on the publisher site, but it's what we call native drivers. So native content, sponsored content drivers. Could be a headline, top 3 things to look for in a skilled nursing facility, or 3 things to look for if you're a nursing aide searching for a job. So it's a photo, there's imagery, and then like a headline, and then it's going to take you back to that particular content. That is then tied to your website. You own the content. There's just a lot of upside if you're trying to differentiate yourself from competitors or really get sort of in the idea of thought leadership. It's a great way to do that. Did I get as excited as you did with geofencing?
You're close. I don't know if you're
Okay.
quite as excited. This is the last one here, I think, for us before we dive into like best practices and close things up. But this one is really recent. I think one of the points Kevin and I, when we were kind of previewing the content, were saying like, this wouldn't have been on our decks like just 6-12 months ago. This one's called Page Context AI. Sometimes they go by different names, the keyword being AI, artificial intelligence. Some of you may or may not have heard about like things out there like Chat GPT and programs like that, which is using artificial intelligence for writing content. Well, it's essentially the same thing, but in reverse here as we look at reading content, right? Like, and so what this is getting at is a next generation of reaching audiences. These platforms have gotten so robust in their ability to like comb through data and what is on all of these sites and what categories are they in, that you can actually reach people in real time with a select group of like phrases and browsing topics and keywords around content that is live on screen, and then align your message with that if it fits. We give the example here at the bottom about reaching users that are interested in family caregiving when they're reading about content around that, right? Like the reality is, in any industry, we can't own everything that's out there, right? There's going to be multiple voices, multiple pieces of information, all kinds of news. So they could be reading a news article about best tips on how to have a senior come live with you at home, or how to care for a senior or elderly parent, or when is the right time to move them into an assisted living facility. And your ads or messages can live on that page while they're consuming that content. When you get to work in these platforms and do it like we do, it's really cool to see the words that pop up. Like you'll populate some examples, like I'll use the word senior here, and that can have multiple meanings, right? And it will give me terms that are like most closely aligned with that. And then you can also negatively target some terms. So like one of the terms, as we say senior, might be like graduation or college or something like that, as we think of like a senior in high school. No, we want to negatively target that because that's not the right type of senior that we're looking for. And then we can give more weight to the terms that are most relevant here. So it's again, Kevin, I think said we sometimes geek out on these things in our perspective, but it's really fun to see those come together and just how like detailed these platforms can now get with aligning messages with the audiences. And this is just the latest example of that.
And that's a great segue into best practices.
Yeah, I think so. So best practices, guys, we're just about wrapped up here and we'll leave a few minutes at the end. If you've thought of questions, I'll go ahead and say it now, pop it into the chat and we can try and answer a few. We should have a few minutes before we wrap. But this is a quick hitting list. I don't need to read everything to you, but the point being that I mentioned this earlier, I think when we got into some of the geofencing side, it's not a perfect science, right? Like there's trial and error. We encourage people to use different types of creative, different ad sizes, different messages within those. We usually try to do a couple different tactics because it's not it's not always a one-to-one. There's one thing that might work really well. Okay, well, let's shift and push into that versus trying to keep doing both. But we like doing a lot of A/B testing if we can. Consider your audience too, right? So like our audiences are going to be in different spaces, right? Is a senior, especially an older senior, going to be streaming as much video as maybe their younger caregiver, an adult child, or maybe for your human resources and your working pool of people, maybe that's the right platform for the video execution. Like we try to say, think just inherently about who you're reaching. And then that's what we try to do, align that with the right targeting option. And then not all of those media channels are the best fit either. So we usually kind of have that conversation, ask a lot of those questions that Kevin brought up earlier in the session and say, like, who is it you're reaching? How have you tried to reach them in the past? Has it been effective? What's the message you need to get in front of them? And then we work with our partners to determine which ones are the best fit. We always try to monitor that activity as we go. Again, that's where it gets into like the optimization. We apply things like those tracking pixels. Kev, I think you wanted to maybe jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that we talk a lot about computer learning and AI, but the reality of where and look, we understand that you have your day job, right? So your full-time job is to actually take care of residents or your employees. So to think that you have a ton of time to really be asking the right questions and diving into the data and understand, like our mission really is to educate brands and organizations on what is happening in this space. And what I mean by that is, although there is a technology component that's incredibly valuable, having human eyes and understanding, at the end of the day, we're trying to connect with families and employees. They're human. So there's, not all impressions are created equal, meaning not all sites are created equal. Not all ad positions are created equal. Not every message applies to every audience. And so there is a decent amount of lift that, based on our experience, if you focus on some of these things, you're going to see a much better return or a much better response to that. We, as I said earlier on, like Wes and I get probably half a dozen emails a day, if not more, from platforms and someone trying to say that they can do it better. But our challenge to you is understand what you're buying, right? So if you're going to do something, or if you're already doing it, understand what the value is, what are the industry standards, how can you improve on the delivery of those particular channels. That's what I would say. We're just incredibly passionate about making sure, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And as PHCA's preferred partner in this space, we want to be a resource for you. So I would say, as we close up with questions and stuff, feel free to contact us if you just want to ask questions offline or have a conversation.
Yeah,
I wanted to make sure that we did say that.
Yeah, and that's a reliable partner. Whether that's we'd love to be in a position to be that partner, to help people if they have questions or interest in this. But the reality is, most of the partners we work with are so busy in their day jobs that this is such an important thing. They continue to be challenged with staffing, with filling beds, getting the right types of people into their facilities. And that requires some degree of marketing, some degree of audience targeting. But they don't have enough hours in the day to get to that. So that's where some sort of partner that can just help deliver the right fit message to the right fit audience really is valuable. This closing slide here, I think, just says a lot of that we try to be really precise in this, and we try to be thoughtful in And we think that our clients and partners and are encouraging all of you to just be thoughtful about, don't take that scattershot approach. We know sometimes that feels easiest, but the reality is it's a disservice to the groups you're reaching. It's a different message that's going to go to that employee versus a resident versus a policymaker. So just give thought around that and try to differentiate yourself versus the other communities out there, but also consider how those audiences are different, and try to be unique in that approach, and be willing to kind of take the extra time and steps to what it's going to pay off in the end, because you're going to get more engagement. You're going to get better fit responses when people do engage with your content. Yeah.
We did pretty good. Like we left 10 minutes for questions.
That worked out perfectly. Just what we wanted. Kim, unless I missed something, I don't see anything in the chat. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or Kim, you had anything?
Yep, so I'm checking the chat. Once again, we welcome questions. If you're presentation shy and you don't want to ask your question with an audience, by all means, please feel free to reach out to myself, Kevin, or Wes. We're happy to answer any questions, whether they come in today, tomorrow, or next week. We're here. Thanks again for presenting today, guys. This was amazing. I'm happy you sent me the presentation because I'm going to be reviewing some of this just myself.
That's good. And Kim, we'll make that available to all the attendees, right?
Yep, I'll be sending that along with everyone's certificate for attending today's session. And yeah, you know what? I will give everyone back 9 minutes of their day. And once again, as always, feel free to reach out if you do have questions after we end today's session. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Wes. Hopefully we'll see everyone here in a couple weeks at convention.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone,
Thank
for joining. Have a great afternoon.